So thank you so much for the time this morning to talk a little bit about the journey, because we're not at the end of that journey in Capital One. And in fact, I've only been at Capital One for just over a year. But we have a kind of like a mantra or a vision, which is really to democratize what we do as researchers. And that's kind of a theme that I've heard through many of the sessions today. So hopefully I'll be reinforcing how we're democratizing what we do at Capital One, but also maybe question some of the other speakers that have spoken about, how do you make insights strategic? And our approach is a little bit different from maybe, because you think of strategy as being started at the top when you're speaking to the leaders. And what we've tried to do is maybe go to the bottom and try and work up by making us part of conversations that are happening at the bottom and then trying influencing how those conversations go up the tree by just getting more and more people involved in those conversations. So it's a slightly different take, so I'd be interested afterwards to hear your questions and your thoughts on that as we go through. So I'm going to start off with a couple of quotes. And I think, although I haven't seen this quote on all of the slides that I've seen this week, it kind of resonates with a lot of other speakers are saying, companies really value customer insights. They're seen as really central to business, and certainly Capital One definitely is in that band. It's, as I say, we don't have that many researchers, but the research that we have are really multidisciplinary, and our research teams really collaborate together. As you heard in my introduction, I'm not a market researcher, I'm a design researcher, and I have a team of 10 or so people in my little team, and then we have maybe 30 or 40 design researchers across Capital One, but we have big market research teams, we have huge data science teams, data analytics teams, and so when we talk about insights and research, I guess if we combined all of those people together, we have got several hundred people who are looking at insights and data across the organization. So this is great. However, this is the problem, is that how do you get to be strategic, and how do you get out of the weeds of just doing the tactical stuff day in and day out? And this is not, I think, just common to Capital One. I think this is common to pretty much every person who I speak to in other sectors and other verticals and other research teams as well. And so we were thinking about this at a very low level. How do we and the research teams that we individuals manage, how do we get ourselves out of the weeds? And we started thinking about this when I joined a year ago in 2017, but we needed some kind of impact or some kind of way of really changing our thinking. And that came, as is often, maybe I'll go through what the problems are first before that came. So what we saw in 2017 was pretty much, I think, what many of you experience as well, is that you've got multiple teams who are working in silos. They're generating insights, they're generating reports, but then there's no framework, there's no network, there's no means of them actually sharing those insights across teams. You've also got multiple teams doing this, and the language that those teams are using, whether they're data scientists or market researchers or design researchers, are very different. And so just connecting those people is fundamental to make sure those insights are being shared. And then also, they're using multiple platforms. So we've got Confluence, we've got SharePoint, we've got Slack now, we've got obviously email, we've got Google, because we've just transitioned over to Google and all of that. So there's just multiple silos, multiple teams, and multiple lines of business. So even in my line of business, I should say as well, when you think of Capital One, I'm in the Capital One line of business that probably none of you actually can probably know about, which is the auto finance business of Capital One. Who knew that we did auto finance? Nobody. Yes, that's not a surprise. Probably the big surprise, though, is Capital One Auto is the biggest auto financing company in the US. It's a really fragmented market. So just before you think, I should jump into that bit. Well, you should jump into that business, but it's a really fragmented business. So these problems that we identified in 2017, I'm sure you and your organizations face similar, if not identical, problems. So what was the catalyst? How did we change and get away from some of this? Not this individual, but someone similar to this individual. A lady joined Capital One as an SVP. And she was in the research area, in the market research side, and as typically what happens when a new leader comes in, she says, okay, what do we know? What do we know about our customers? What do we know about their problems? What do they know? And she came into the typical problem that all people coming into large corporations face is, first of all, they don't know where to look, and they don't think we know anything. And then the next big reckoning is, oh my God, there's so much stuff out there, but I don't know how to find it, yes? And then the third reckoning is, how then do you filter all this stuff into meaningful stuff? And so with her coming on board actually was our catalyst. And she did a really smart thing, which I would advocate you do, is that you take away some of the initiatives which you've been thinking are side of desk activities, and you put someone responsible for it. And so she hired Colleen, who this paper has jointly been presented with. She said, Colleen, you are going to try and solve this problem, and it's your full-time role. And then Colleen, and her ability to influence and work through the organization, started to put together a team who could then focus on solving this problem. Because previously, we'd all been thinking about this for 6 or 7 months, but it was always a side of desk. So we'd always got, at the end of the month, it was always, oh, next month we'll think about that, and then we'll do a workshop, and then it never really happened. But by having that focus on one person, saying you're responsible for this, gave us the impetus or the catalyst to actually make something different. So what did we want? Basically, we wanted to address these questions. We wanted a platform which would allow us to democratize what we were doing. And I'm going to come back to democratization as well, because we've taken democratization to a whole new level in comparison with what we were doing at PayPal. We had to make it accessible to everyone across the organization. We didn't want to see researchers as gatekeepers. We wanted to ensure that everyone in the organization could really come to their own conclusions, maybe with our recommendations, but they could go on the journey themselves rather than thinking that we were the custodians of all the good stuff, of all the knowledge. So it had to be single sign-on. It also, because there's so many different teams creating this stuff, it had to be multi-content sourced. So everything from opening up Tableau files to PDFs, videos I'm going to talk about later, spreadsheets, all the typical things that we use to put our notes or our synthesis or our reports together, it had to be able to incorporate all of those. It also had to be very easy to integrate with other data sources that were not necessarily going to be on the platform, but we needed to integrate with it. And also, it had to be a model of users to interact with which they were really familiar with. The two things that we really focused on was searchable and shareable. So we have a lot of millennials. I'm a little bit older than a millennial now. But we know if they're going to be doing something, you have to be using paradigms which they're really familiar with. So you have to make it very Google-esque. And if it can look anything like Pinterest, you've already got their buy-in. So the platform that we went with, which I'll talk and show you in a few moments, is very familiar to using on social media, that you can start sharing things, favoriting things, liking things by, to try and encourage people to get into our world without thinking this is heavyweight research. Yes? The other thing that we wanted as well is because we were so siloed and so many people were working in different areas, there was never a single source of truth. There was nothing which said, oh, this is our point of view on this particular topic, on this particular customer base. And so there's a mantra within Capital One now of moving between what we don't know, our unknowns, and our knowns. And until we had some kind of system across the whole enterprise where we could say this is a known piece of information, we could never make that transition. And so when I'm working with teams, it's all about them identifying what they don't know, their unknowns, and then trying to introduce them to platforms or tools or services or doing their own research to get them to the knowns. And so having this source which would allow us to start that journey was really, really important. So what did we do? So it didn't happen overnight, as I say. In the beginning part of 2018, we launched something called Atlas, a world of knowledge. It's a bit grandiose. Maybe we'll get there. As I say, this is the beginning part of the journey. And just so you're aware, and you may have seen their stand outside, we chose to use BLOOMFIRE for that platform. If you haven't spoken to the people at BLOOMFIRE, I don't work for BLOOMFIRE, but I'd strongly recommend you connect. If anything that I'm talking about today is relevant to you, please connect with them because they obviously know a lot more about the platform than I do. So we created this thing called Atlas, and then we ran into working in a bank, which is governance. And if you don't work in the financial services sector, compliance and governance are the two, I was going to say bags that you carry around with you, but it feels like that most of the time, yes? So the governance was, okay, so we agree you need a platform like this. How are you going to structure it? Who's going to own it? How are you going to tag content? What are the rules around how people can use it? And we chose to be a little bit radical, which was says, well, do we really need to define all that stuff up front? That's probably going to take 6 months. That's going to delay the launch. Are we going to make the right decisions? So because some design researchers were in there, and obviously the market research team were thinking about it as well, let's just eat our own dog food a little bit. You must have heard that expression, yes? You know, do what you're going to get users to do it. So why don't we do some research on our own users? Makes sense, yes? They're the people who we're designing this tool or product for, so that we can begin to answer these questions. And then we made, and I thought it was really interesting through this week, that we've heard this idea of connecting dots. And so there's a lot of really smart people in Capital One. And so we thought, well, maybe when we're thinking about the structure, we look at something and the work of Christopher Alexander. I'm not sure whether you've heard of Christopher Alexander. He's an architect or urban planner. If you don't know of him, you've definitely seen things that he's influenced. Probably his main point, and this is why we've put this illustration on here, is to do with how people move through physical space. You know, in a controlled world, the planners come in and they put all the roadways in and they put all the paths, and then, of course, real people navigate through those paths and turn corners. They always go from A to C to B to D to F. They never go from A to F, yes? What Christopher Alexander demonstrated is people never do that. And if you look at any city, it's the corridors that they make through that environment is actually where they want to go, rather than you predefining everything up front. So we took a message or the logic behind that and said, we're going to create or launch Atlas without any governance. We're just going to say it's available, you can go and use it, you just throw your content on there, and we're going to constantly learn about how people are using the system, and then we're going to create the pathways based on what we see and how people are using it. So what are people uploading? When are they uploading? How are they tagging things? How are they categorizing things? We're not going to impose a hierarchy on them. We're going to learn over time how they do that, and then we're going to put some boundaries and structure around it, but not come out with a structure initially. So this work, if you're interested, it might be interesting to have a look at it. That was one of the doctrines. The other doctrine that we had, again, it has to be simple to access. SSO is so important. You know, multi-factor authentication just to get into our systems in the bank is a nightmare already. So we didn't want another set of passwords, another set of IDs that you need to remember in order to get into this. And then that's getting into the system. And then when we're in the system, it really, as I mentioned before, it has to be really, really easy to use. And then this is the type of content that we started to see people uploading. So we saw typical articles, we saw people uploading videos, because we didn't say you couldn't upload a video. So why wouldn't people upload a video? If they think that's going to be a good way to tell a story or a good way to inform, then why wouldn't they do that? We've also got conversations starting, which I said that's what we tried to do. You can see some of the icons on the bottom of each article. Do I love it? Do I like it? Would I recommend it? You can also start conversations. And one of the things we observed is that as people were uploading, and this is really important as well, it wasn't just the researchers that were uploading content. The idea was is if you've learned something and you think this is useful to be shared with other people across this community, why don't you upload it? And so we were which is again, very different. We're a bank, yes? This is very different from how banks normally behave. There are roles, responsibilities, only certain people can do things, there's firewalls, everything else. So we were really giving people a lot of opportunity to break some of the rules or make their own rules. And then once they've made the rules, then we can start to not enforce, but at least communicate those rules out to people. And so what we saw very quickly is that lots of people were uploading lots of different content types, which again, and the other important thing is although this program really started with this SVP coming in and giving the mandate, essentially, there's one person responsible for this, everything else has been from the ground up. We haven't done big campaigns. Yes, we do little roadshows and workshops with teams who are generating insights or doing interviews, but everything else is from the bottom up. We haven't been mandated people, this is where you've got to go. It's kind of sense, if they don't want to use it, well, they're going to go somewhere else. We can't force people to use this. But if they start to see benefit in this, then that's a reason why they should use it or could use it. And so this is just a splattering of some of the content that we have there, but this is what the interface actually looks like. And I've just taken a screenshot. This was from a while ago. But one of the things that you see here on the left-hand side is actually something that we didn't determine. These are the categories. And what we found is that, yes, categories in terms of our different lines of business, so the card, the bank, the SMB team, the auto team, those are actually important for people who are creating content and want to share their content. But these categories were created from what we observed of how people were tagging their content. So we didn't come up with this structure. This was designed or created by the groups who were actually creating and adding content to this. The other thing that we added was this very generic search bar at the top, which then we pulled out things that we thought people were going to be interested in. And again, through the looking at the tagging that they use, so industry insights, deep dives, moments, stories was a thing it may change to say stories, but it's customer moments. And then obviously, we need to provide some support in terms of what they can do with this. And so this, as you can see, it does look a little bit like Pinterest. Yes, you have these little cards. The card clearly states, which again is really important, who posted this. So if you want to reach out to a researcher, and if you're in McLean where we've got the card team, I'm in Dallas, I might not even know that person, but at least then I can start to have a conversation. I know who I should be connected with. And then the other thing that was really interesting, you can see here we've got these things called series. So what we wanted to do is move very slowly the researcher's role from really doing a lot of this stuff to curating or telling stories about particular topics. And so this idea of having a series, so we pull together as a researcher, what are the top things or the top 6 articles or the top 6 sheets that you could look at to tell a story about, in this instance, for example, banking and finance trends and futures, or the upmarket audience. And so you as a researcher, you curate a series of articles which are already in the platform to tell that particular story. And we've found these particularly useful, and they're getting a lot of visits when we look at the analytics from the people who are posting stuff. So it was great. Actually, another SVP reached out maybe a month ago with this comment, which it wasn't the same SVP, but it was someone who was interested. I needed a bunch of audience research to prep for a board meeting. She used Atlas. I didn't need to chase anyone for the PowerPoints, which is, I don't know if that happens in your businesses, but that certainly happens in our business. So we've already given time back to our research team and put the onus on the person who wants to use the information, the tools for them to go and find their own information, and then they can use it in a way which is right for them, rather than we being these kind of like people who are controlling the dialogue, the conversation. And, to get an SVP to say it's a fantastic resource is a huge accolade in terms of what we were trying to do. So this is all well and good, and this was recent. I actually had another comment that came in last week, which I didn't put in my deck, which was even better. We have a slight problem at Capital One where we really, maybe I should go back and tell a little bit of story about when we talk about empowering or democratizing research, we've really gone into this full hop, which means that anybody can request not request research to be done for them, they can do research themselves. So we spend a lot of time building panels, determining tools that they could use, and anyone can do this, to the point of which, as we go into calibration at the end of the year, people, everyone, front-end engineers, back-end engineers, product people, designers, data analytics, they are getting scored on how many interactions they've had with actual customers. So when you industrialize, thousands of people in an organization and given them the mandate to create insights, this kind of portal is absolutely key. Because where do these people put this stuff? Or you get stuff lost in little silos of teams which nobody ever sees, and that's a real problem. So the comment that so the question is, this is fantastic. Everyone's doing research. The problem is everyone's doing research. And so everybody is spending a lot of time doing research. So what we're doing now is retraining people to say, well, maybe before you start to do your own research, which we know we're going to incentivize you by and you're going to get your merits and everything at the end of the year, maybe you should go here first to see maybe you can look if someone else has done the research first, yes? That change in culture has not really happened yet. Maybe in a year's time I'll report back and say, did you make it happen? But only last week we got a report from another senior product person who said, thank you. You saved me 6 weeks of time and $75,000, which I was going to spend with a research agency, because I found something that actually helped my team get over what the questions that they wanted to address. And now what I can do is use a smaller budget to actually go deeper into the questions that report that I found didn't address. So we're getting there on this one-year journey, but we haven't got there yet. So this is fine, but there is another problem. And the other problem is I work in design research. That's not a problem, by the way. I love working in design research, just to make that sure. The problem with design research is this, essentially. These three things. We almost never produce reports. Yeah? We don't write reports. We don't have time. The timeline that we have to work to is so short. Like a team may come to us on the Monday and say, okay, we've got these questions. By the Friday, they want the answers to those questions because their design sprint means that they have to deliver something at the end of the following week. So they have to work. And if I got really nervous when I first went to Capital One because the buzzword at Capital One is, let's be scrappy. And scrappy's fine. Scrappy doesn't mean kind of like you have to cut corners all the time, but it does mean that you have to do things really quickly. And so that's a problem. We don't have traditional reports, and we have, as I said, masses of people producing research. So this tool, which we were all raving about and got great publicity for, and the SVPs were sending us emails saying this is fantastic, was failing for these teams because they didn't produce anything to put onto Atlas. So what could we do to try and resolve this? And this is where I think we've taken what we're doing at Capital One to a very different level, which is really, really democratizing research. Because now what we're doing is we're actually giving people access to the very raw data of qualitative research. And the raw data of qualitative research, from our point of view, are the interviews, the videos, the audio files of the things that these teams are actually doing. So, you know, if we've got, in my line of business, every week I would have maybe 10 teams doing some kind of qualitative research. And so we've got lots and lots and lots of videos, which again were all in these individual teams that nobody knew what was being done, nobody could understand the questions that were being asked. And so we said, well, why can't we create, using this platform, a tool to help address that problem? And so I've shown this example here because, and again, I'm not selling BLOOMFIRE, but the problem with video, we all know what the problem with video is, don't we? It's a duration, yes? It's a time-based media. And the problem is, where does the insight happen in that string of 20 minutes to an hour, yes? With BLOOMFIRE, and again, I don't work for the company, but I'm just saying, because it solved a problem for me, is when you upload a video, it auto-transcribes. It auto-transcribes the video. So then when you're at the very top of the interface and you do a search query, it's searching on that transcript. Phenomenal. Even better, it's actually pinpointing in the video. See the white dots on the screen on the timeline below there? That's where that phrase that has been inputted into the search field actually gets spoken on that video. So what you can do now is you can jump into, anyone in the business can jump into, search for a video, find a segment in that video, and then can hear directly from a customer what they think about the topic which you, maybe as an SVP, was looking for. So this, for me, has been a phenomenal change. So we started producing a kind of normal, if you can imagine, you know, the knowledge pyramid. We designed a platform which was really at the top of that pyramid. This is what we know. These are the topics which we've been working on, and we have points of view on this, and this is all great stuff. But we were missing all of the bottom layer of that platform. And then this is what addresses the noise, yes? But it addresses noise in a more intelligent way because you can begin to actually identify where that noise is coming from, who's saying these things, and how are they talking about it. And it's allowing you to get into that data and allowing teams to actually begin to think and raise their own questions and hypotheses that we as researchers then can have a point of view on without actually being directly involved in all of that research. Yes? So we can liberate the research process so that they can really do a lot of their own stuff, and then we can come in as consultants or mentors or coaches to help them understand what is in the system and how that might be important to them. So we then move from being tacticians to getting into strategic conversations. So it's the role that we're taking is very much, as I said, at the ground, because that's what they need to hear. How can we influence that so that then we can get in the right seats at the right tables to talk about the strategic questions that this is allowing people to start to ask? So what does this look like? As you can see, it's almost an identical interface. Oh, I should say as well, Because I know a lot of researchers were saying, what are you doing? You're giving away the goodness of, that's why I'm a researcher. I spent my career doing analysis and synthesis. You know, I know how to interpret all this stuff. By giving that away, aren't you degrading or devaluing what we do as researchers? I don't agree with that. I think we get more credibility talking to executives if they can see what we do and if they can maybe empathize with our world as well, yes? That they can see, wow, you really sit through 6 hours of video to try and identify this stuff? Yeah, that's what I do. That's my job. And now I'm giving you the opportunity to do that too. So I think it's an easier conversation. And that transparency then happens throughout the whole of the conversations that you have. And it builds trust. So just to give you a sense of, okay, so what happened? Well, we released this as a pilot just in my division in auto finance maybe 3 or 4 months ago. Within that time frame, within the first 2 months, I should say, we had 500 hours of video conversations with customers and research that was done within the first 2 months. Now that it's been going for just over 6 months, we have 1,200 hours. And as we've extended over to other lines of business, and it's not been rolled out across all the business lines yet, we anticipate every year we'll have tens of thousands of hours of video on this platform, which can all be searched at the same time. Which then means that if you're putting a general search in, you know, I'm really interested in, as we do, subprime customers and how they kind of like make ends meet, if you then put that query in and you work in card, who knows, maybe you'll pull up some interviews that we did in auto finance or in banking, which you would never have access to and never even think that that team is even addressing these questions. But because here, you can start to like things, you can start to have a conversation and a commentary and talk about what's going on, then you can be much more prepared for those conversations and engage across the organization to make some of these connections work. Because chances are a customer that has a credit card with us may also have an auto loan with us. And it's the same person. And to hear the same people across those different lines of business connect and have the same problems, that's really important. So, and we got some good feedback as well. And this is from design people, because this is begun as a design tool. You know, a VP saying, you know, I can hear and see research in action. How good is that, yes? That people are so then more engaged in what we're doing that they're actively going into this platform and looking for things. And again, this one, the senior director of design, you know, it's a game changer. I can jump into a video and hear firsthand. I haven't got to listen to all of this stuff. Now, it's not perfect, you know, and I've been talking to BLOOMFIRE, said it'd be great then if we could create a clip of that video and then push that into Slack and then get other people. We're not there yet. As I say, we're on this journey. Who knows, maybe we'll get there. But just to get this feedback after a few months is really great. So just to wrap up, what have we learned? Because it all started off in terms of, you know, we want to be strategic. So what does it mean to be strategic? Because we all want to be strategic. We all want to be, you know, having the right conversations and managing our careers. So we said, well, to be strategic or strategically thinking, you probably need to be looking at this. You probably need to be able to observe and see trends. Maybe this platform can help. You definitely need to be asking tough questions. And if you don't know any of this topic, then to be able to ask those questions is going to help you. You also need to get out of the weeds. But often you don't know what the weeds are, so how do you know that you're out of them? So if we can provide people the access to the weeds, which is this raw video footage, then they can begin to get out of those weeds. Does that make sense? It's a bit rhetorical. And then the final thing is, we have to give people time to think. Now, we were being a little bit selfish because we just wanted our researchers to have time to think. But actually, now we're giving other teams time to think because hopefully they won't be rushing in to do their own research. They'll be looking at what's already been captured and using that time then to synthesize what do we not know. Because there's some things that we already know. So we can be focusing on the stuff that we need to work on in the future. So this is all great. And in fact, if you look at it, it's, you know, what do we know? How do we think about it? What are we talking about? How do we talk about the questions that we don't know? And then most importantly in any strategy is how we're acting upon those questions. So I think what we've tried to do with Atlas is do this. We've created insights and a tool to provide a space for our customers, which is everyone in Capital One who can access this, and everyone can, it's single sign-on, to learn and get closer to and build greater empathy with our customers by hearing those customers firsthand so that we're not constraining or determining that conversation. And that goes all the way back to the paths that we get to design the system in terms of the Alexandra work, all the way through to the content that's available on the platform. So we've created, I think, a strategic place where conversations can start to happen across the organization. And I think that's it. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions.